ARS facility in Salinas. He's a geneticist working on, of course, Fusarium Wilt on lettuce, as well as trying to improve the genetics for management of other diseases on other crops as well. So again, Jim, it's all yours.
Okay, very good. They asked me to talk about the successes and progress to date with the program that I've been heading up in Salinas, and we'll give you a good overview of what we've done. So objectives when Fusarium first broke out in Arizona back in the early 2000s. We wanted to find out what the race was. We knew there were different races at that time. Dr. Fujinaga had, I think about that time, had described 2 races, and we wanted to know which one we had. Wanted to identify highly resistant germplasm, determine the inheritance of resistance, and then develop elite germplasm that would be useful for the industry. And you've heard several references this morning about different races, and this is kind of a summary of that. And these are differentials that came from Japan. Costa Rica number 4, you've seen Banshee, Redfire, and Patriot, universal susceptible line. And it was interesting to hear the presentations this morning, because based on the literature describing the races, it suggested they were independent. They weren't a result of resistance, pressure from resistant varieties or resistance genes on the population, that they were independent origins of those 3 races. So we quickly learned using the differentials from Dr. Fujinaga that we have race 1 in Arizona and California. He typed the race that Jim Garrick and Judy Hubbard sent to him from Huron in the 90s and confirmed that was race 1 as well. And in our greenhouse tests and field tests in Arizona, we confirmed it as well. So we looked at, we had Costa Rica number 4 was one of the first resistance sources that came to our attention. This was from the Japanese program. When we talked to them at this time, contingents were coming from Japan asking what we were doing and what kind of progress we had made on Fusarium resistance, and we really were just starting this work. We hadn't done anything. And they brought seeds of Costa Rica number 4 and Patriot at the time, and they told us that it came from Salinas, which surprised us. We had no reason to believe Salinas had any resistance. But in our tests, we determined that Salinas has a level of resistance that looks quite useful at times, and other times it's not so interesting. Salinas 88 also has resistance, and it probably derived from Kalmar. And then through the field tests that Mike described earlier, Mike Matheron described earlier, we identified resistance in a number of other types of lettuces as well. And the romaine lines looked especially interesting among these groups in the early plantings in the desert here in the Yuma area. We made crosses of Costa Rica 4, Salinas and Salinas 88 with Vanguard, and in each case our data suggested that resistance was recessive. And as I looked at the data in preparing for this talk, I could see where depending how you shift the scores, you can come up with either a dominant or resistance or a recessive trait. So it was interesting to hear Dr. Race's paper earlier this morning. So here's some F2 data. You can see in the greenhouse we can really achieve quite high levels. This is one F2 population of Vanguard by Salinas 88. We only had one what we called truly resistant line. There was no discoloration in the roots. Everything else was susceptible. So this is, perhaps we were using an inoculum level that was too high. We may have been, this is the level that we had here, 5 times 10 to the 6 propagules per milliliter. Another population here, this time with Costa Rica number 4, which supposedly derived from Salinas. And we had a little better result here, a better fit to a 3-to-1 ratio if you're looking for a single gene. Okay. We, as I mentioned, Salinas, and Richard pointed out also the resistance in Salinas is sort of intermediate, and there are tests when it looks really good and other tests when it doesn't look so good, and I've been thinking that perhaps in the desert where we've planted it, it's not adapted, so it perhaps looks more severe in the desert than it might in an area to which it's adapted. But this table here lists a number of lines, mostly romaines here, but we do have Salinas here in Vanguard. I think Slugger is maybe got some other icebergs in here. But you can see this was in 2007 in the disease index in the field, and Salinas had a disease index of 45, and most of the romaines look very good, low, really low disease indexes. And so as a result of this, we decided to pursue the resistance in the romaine types. And made a number of different crosses of these various romaine types with high level. We also had a romaine with what we call an intermediate level of resistance. We crossed them with various varieties here. And we've moved forward with the King Louis by Autumn Gold cross. Autumn Gold's an iceberg type adapted to the fall desert slot. This is on a 1 to 4 scale, 1 being no evidence of symptoms and 4 being dead. And you can see where Autumn Patriot, Autumn Gold, Salinas, this is one of the romaine lines, forget what that one stands for, King Louis and Costa Rica 4. And you can see in 2010 and 2012, the lines with resistance or susceptibility shift back and forth. You can see Salinas looked pretty good in 2010, but not so good in 2012. Patriot generally stands over to the right as the most susceptible line that we have in the material. We compared those two years of data, and it's a pretty good correlation. Some lines weren't as good in 2012 as they were in 2010, and vice versa. But the correlation is pretty good in this F3 population. F3. We advanced those to F4s. A number of them looked like iceberg types. A number of them were segregating for type. One of the problems that we've had is we've dug plants up in the field in Yuma. We take them to the greenhouse in Salinas and essentially have had 0 survival in the greenhouse. So that's hindered selection progress. We have to go back to the F3 and just pick plants at random out of the F3. We had a test of the F4 in Yuma a couple years ago. It was a field courtesy of JV Farms. It was considered to be a moderate level of disease, and it was one of the best fields we've had in terms of disease severity. We planted it mid-September, evaluated it in mid-November. We had 95 F4s. The susceptible plants were almost completely dead, as you can see here. It's a near perfect score of a 3.9. The F4, the mean of the F4 was 1.5, so we had a really good range of reaction in the F4, and our resistant lines performed pretty well here, 1.3. And this is a distribution of the F4 populations and the various other Czech varieties in here. There's a bunch over here that 12 lines that had ratings of 1s, so they look very interesting to us. Costa Rica number 4 actually held up very well, but you can see Salinas over here in the mid-range, not looking very good. When we go to the field test this afternoon, you'll see some F5 lines that we've produced from here. There's 4 of them, 3 of them are in one of the test and 3 are in the other test. This is data from about 2 weeks ago. Symptoms were showing up. I think Mike or Barry had mentioned it's kind of a moderate disease level in this field test, but the F5s were looking pretty good. So we've taken the F4s. This is we've produced the F5. We've also crossed the F4s with iceberg types to combine resistance with adaptation to the desert slot. Also, you've heard mentioned Fusariums occurring now in the Salinas area. There's some fields where it's suspected that both Fusarium and Verticillium are present, so we've crossed this material with some of Ryan Hayes' Verticillium Wilt material to bring those 2 resistances together. And so that's just the beginning of that program. So a number of people that have been involved in various phases of the project since we started 14 years ago or so. Special thanks to the Iceberg Lettuce Council of Arizona and also the California Leafy Greens Board and the various farms that have hosted some of these trials that we've had here in the area. So with that, I'll finish, and if you have any questions, be glad to answer them for you.